Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated as our program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and welcome the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, the Honourable Janet Austin, and the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
Prime Minister Trudeau, Greater Vancouver Board of Trade leaders, members, and guests. I'd like to acknowledge with respect the long history, tradition, and culture of the Coast Salish peoples, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, upon whose traditional territory we gather today, and to thank them for sharing these lands in peace and friendship. Haitchkasiam. Dear friends, I am absolutely delighted to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, and most especially to our very special guest, Prime Minister Trudeau, today. I'm very proud of my long association with the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. I'm proud of the splendid work the board has done to position our region to thrive economically and socially. I'm proud of its leadership in advancing women's equality and its unshakable commitment to gender parity on the board of directors. I'm proud of its success in attracting a dynamic network of young professionals who bring incredible energy and contemporary perspective to the work of the board. And I'm proud of the thoughtful, evidence-based approach to policy development, which recognizes that a healthy economy depends to a very large degree on the social cohesion in the society that supports it. In my new role as Lieutenant Governor, I have the privilege of identifying a few themes that I would like to emphasize during my mandate. And I'd like to share with you the three that I've chosen. I believe that they're actually very well aligned with the vision and values of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. So they are reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous peoples, inclusion, diversity, and gender equality, which I think most of you know is very much in alignment with my previous professional and volunteer work. And the third one is building support for our democracy and our public institutions. I think, like many of you, as we look outward in the world, I find myself increasingly concerned about the fragility of democracy, about erosion of respect for the institutions that support it, and of the decline in civility in public discourse. In Canada, we're not immune to these challenges, but I do believe that the stability of our country and our democratic conventions stands in contrast to the dysfunction we see emerging elsewhere, and are all the more to be valued and nurtured. I intend to use my term to promote democratic and economic literacy, to encourage courteous dialogue and informed decision-making based on shared facts and agreed principles of engagement. Perhaps first among young people, our next voters, whom we must depend upon to lead future governments at every level. But we must also work to ensure that all British Columbians, all Canadians, have a solid understanding and respect for the foundations of good government. I feel this responsibility deeply, and I claim it among my top priorities. Your chair, Laurie Matheson, has also identified democracy as a key theme for her term, and I'm delighted to find common cause with the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade and excited about our unfolding plans for collaboration. So I thank you again for the opportunity to join you today, and I look forward to the time that we have together and with our very special guest, the Prime Minister of Canada. Thank you all so much. Haitchka.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of the Chartered Professional Accountants of BC and the Chair of Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, Laurie Matheson.
Thank you, Your Honor. What a privilege to have you here with us today on already a very special day. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As mentioned, I am Laurie Matheson, President and CEO of the Chartered Professional Accountants of British Columbia. And I'm also delighted to serve as the 2018-2019 Chair of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Just a quick reminder to please silence your mobile devices, but feel free to use them to engage with the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with hashtag GVBOT. And you will also have the opportunity to put questions to the Prime Minister later, so please keep your devices handy. For over 131 years, the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade has been facilitating gatherings just like this one, bringing national and international thought leaders together with you, the men and women who actually make the capital investment and job-creating decisions that drive our economy. Let me thank each of you for taking the time to be part of that tradition again here today. On behalf of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade staff, Board of Directors, and governors, I'd like to express what an honor it is for our organization to welcome today's very special guest, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. In his remarks today, Prime Minister Trudeau will discuss the newly agreed upon free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico, the USMCA, highlighting its benefits for Canadians and businesses from coast to coast. He will also discuss the critical role that the Pacific Gateway here in Greater Vancouver plays in driving our national economy and the growing importance of trade diversification in the 21st century. Following his remarks, the Prime Minister has agreed to sit down with our President and CEO, Ian Black, for a moderated Q&A discussion, including taking questions from you, our audience members. The legendary events team at the board was put to a test this week in arranging today's event with literally a few days' notice. And while we don't normally do this, I hope you will join me in acknowledging that they've once again pulled it off in style with today's full house. So let's give them a hand. So good as our team is, though, these events don't happen without a tremendous amount of support from the great leaders in our business community. First, we want to acknowledge our pillar partners. These 5 special organizations have exceeded the status of being consistent and very generous supporters of the work of the board to become true cornerstones of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade going forward. Our pillar partners include TELUS, CN, YBR, Pacific Blue Cross, and BCIT. Will you please join me in thanking our pillar partners? And as for today's event, it took some additional and specific support to bring it to life. Our presenting sponsors today include Fasken and CN. Our supporting sponsors today include the Chartered Professional Accountants of British Columbia, Air Canada, Coast Capital Savings, Global Container Terminals Canada, and KPMG. Our community sponsors, Ports of Vancouver, PwC, and M&P. The board's preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver. And today's event is presented in partnership with World Trade Center Vancouver. What a tremendous showing of support from our business community on such short notice. Again, let's show our appreciation for all these terrific sponsors and partners. As always, these gatherings are more compelling when we hear directly from you. We are using an interactive question and answer service today called Slido for the Q&A portion. There's no need to download anything. You simply need to log on. Just go to slido.com on your smartphone. And today's event passcode is Canada 2018. And the instructions are on the screen. You can easily post your own questions or vote for questions that are already submitted, and that will increase the likelihood that Ian will direct a question to the Prime Minister, so ask away. I now have the pleasure of inviting Will Westerling, the Managing Partner of the BC region for Fasken, to give the official introduction of today's honoured speaker. Please welcome Will to the stage.
Thank you very much, Laurie, and good afternoon, everyone. As a Canadian-based international business law firm, the state of Canada's economy is of considerable importance to our clients, and so supporting today's event is a natural fit for Fasken. As a trading nation in an increasingly volatile world, Canada's prosperity is dependent upon having a Prime Minister who has a vision Canadians can rally around and the skill and determination to negotiate international trade agreements that are in Canada's best interests. Our Prime Minister Trudeau fits that bill. His vision of Canada is a country where everyone has a real and fair chance to succeed and a place where everyone has the opportunities they need to thrive. With regard to trade, the respected, restrained, but also tenacious negotiating approach employed by Minister Freeland and the Prime Minister throughout the challenging NAFTA negotiations resulted in the new tentative USMCA to the relief, and I think with the support of most Canadians. That is true leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Canada's 23rd Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, Will, and for all the work you do helping local companies grow. I'm very glad to be here alongside the Honourable Janet Austin, Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. Thank you so much, Janet, for all your leadership. I know that Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, Joyce Murray, and Randeep Sarai are also here today, all great local MPs. I also want to recognize the Honourable Hetty Fry, although she couldn't join us today. She's another strong voice for this community. I have to tell you, it's great to be back in Vancouver. Having spent so much time in BC over the course of my life, learning to sail at Jericho Beach, spending time with my grandparents in West Van, camping with my mom on Vancouver Island, working with my little brother up at Whistler, or of course, teaching across the Lower Mainland as I started my professional career. Every time I get to come back here, I feel at home. But I also feel like I'm getting a glimpse into our future as a country. You've got cities and towns with fresh ideas across the province, businesses building prosperity for the middle class by reaching customers half a world away, and communities doing their part to keep our coasts healthy. There's no doubt BC is ahead of the curve, and that's no coincidence. It's thanks to leaders like you. You may remember that I was here at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade a few years back. It was 2014. And I was, back then, at that point, the youngest federal leader by far. But I distinctly remember using my time to talk with you about leadership, about how it's our responsibility to build a stronger, more prosperous Canada, about how a healthy economy starts with a thriving middle class. I remember saying that trade is our way forward. Well, my friends, 4 years later, I'm more convinced than ever that expanding access to new markets through modern, progressive trade agreements is the ticket to our success. That it's good for everyone, small, medium-sized, and large businesses, the middle class, and people working hard to join the middle class. You know that, as do most Canadians. That's why I'm making international trade diversification a top priority for our government. We've done some great work already, which I'll get to shortly, but the push for more trade and investment should never stop. Later this month, I'll be in Singapore, attending the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit and at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Leaders Meeting in Papua New Guinea, highlighting innovative Canadian businesses across the region and promoting trade with fast-growing Asian-Pacific markets. This trip to Asia is part of our plan to keep building prosperity for people in BC. You see, Vancouver isn't just a gateway to the Pacific, it's the Asia-Canada hub for trade and business. That's why we also have half a dozen ministers traveling to China this fall to talk about expanding opportunities for businesses and for the middle class. You see, when we formed government, we knew that to grow the middle class and find new opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs, we were going to have to think beyond our borders. So we've been hard at work over the past 3 years, and I think the results speak for themselves. Just take a look at the real progress we've made for Canadian workers and entrepreneurs who rely on access to Pacific markets. Maybe you started out years or even decades ago as a mom and pop shop selling salmon or crab. Lately, business has picked up tremendously, and you're ready to expand. Well, our government is right there supporting you as you make that leap to new markets and new customers. Consider, for example, our work on the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Under CPTPP, 100% of fish and seafood tariff lines are duty-free. That's huge for businesses like that up-and-coming seafood exporter. Pour être certain que les gens profitent de ces avantages le plus rapidement possible, nous avons fait de l'accord de partenariat transpacifique global et progressiste l'une de nos grandes priorités. Plus tôt cette semaine, le Canada est devenu le 5e pays à avoir officiellement ratifié l'accord. Ça veut dire que les entreprises de Vancouver et de la Colombie-Britannique sont bien placées pour aller chercher une nouvelle clientèle dès l'entrée en vigueur de cet accord historique. And if you work in the digital, tech, and film sectors, making movies or new apps, well, that's an industry that creates well-paying, middle-class jobs in every part of this province, rural and urban, north and south. Well, our government's got your back there, too. Although the Pacific opportunity is huge for BC, people here know how important it is to work and trade with our American friends, too. In fact, just this year, we saw how the first direct downtown Seattle to Vancouver flights are keeping those ties alive and growing. That's why our government funded the pilot project for this new service, helping it literally get off the ground. From San Diego to Prince Rupert, the West Coast is home to a whole host of companies that rely on cross-border collaboration. So it's reasons like that BC businesses and families are better off when we have a strong, secure relationship with the U.S. Over 13 whirlwind months of tough negotiations, we pushed hard to get good results for Canadians with the new United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. That included helping BC's vibrant video game and digital media sectors do business with our neighbors to the south. And there's also good news for BC's agricultural sector. Thousands of farmers will continue to benefit from duty-free access to the vast majority of U.S. and Mexican agricultural tariff lines. On top of that, new market access means great things for companies like Vancouver-based Atlantic Sugar, who are able to reach new customers. But our government isn't just negotiating free trade, we're negotiating fair trade, which is just as important. And if you don't believe me, ask someone in the BC lumber industry. Right from the very beginning of the USMCA negotiations, we fought hard to keep Chapter 19 intact. We fought on behalf of the people across this province and across the country because we know how vital their work is to our economy and to their communities. With Chapter 19 secure, you can rest easy knowing that we have the tools we need to make sure Canadian businesses are treated fairly. So what else? Wait, there's more, you might ask. What else are we doing for Canadian businesses and for the middle class? For people who work at a mill on Vancouver Island or run a logging company in the interior? Well, we're working hard to secure even more export destinations for you. Grâce à l'accord économique et commercial global conclu entre le Canada et l'Union européenne, les gens du secteur forestier pourront vendre leurs produits sur les marchés européens dont la valeur s'élève à 3,3 000 milliards de dollars. Il s'agit d'un autre marché immense qui vous permettra de faire croître vos entreprises. Bien entendu, nos accords commerciaux avec les pays de la région de l'Asie-Pacifique, avec les États-Unis et le Mexique et avec l'Union européenne ne sont pas seulement bons pour les gens qui exportent des fruits de mer, des films et des produits forestiers. Ces accords commerciaux sont bons pour tous les Canadiens. These agreements tackle head-on what people are up at night worrying about, whether they can count on their job, whether they'll get left behind in a changing economy. When we were elected, we promised to support Canadians, to help people succeed in the economy of tomorrow, even if it looks very different from the economy of today. That's why in all three agreements, we made labor a top priority. In CETA and CPTPP, we upheld fundamental rights at work. In fighting to save and update NAFTA, our government fought for Canadian jobs. We will always do that. We are the government that stands up for Canadian workers and for Canadian families. These deals are good for the middle class and for people working hard to join it. Because through trade, we can create new opportunities for people to build real, lasting success for themselves and for their families. And Canada is in a very good position to make that happen. We now have preferred market access to 2/3 of the global economy. We're the only G7 country with preferential access to European, Asia-Pacific, and North American markets. Simply put, we're the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. Now that's a recipe for success. My friends, we're already seeing proof that our plan is working. 600,000 more Canadians are working today than at this time 2 years ago, and our unemployment rate is the lowest it has been in 40 years. Add to that record-level Canadian exports, and you can see how our economy is one of the best performing in the G7. And on the international investment front, there's more good news. A month ago, I was here in BC to announce the single largest private sector investment in Canadian history, a $40 billion LNG Canada project in Kitimat, a joint venture of 5 companies in 5 countries. This project is a vote of confidence in the Canadian economy. It's a clear sign that the world wants to do business with BC. That means prosperity for everyone. The new LNG project will create 10,000 good jobs for Canadians at the height of construction. And what's more, LNG puts us on the path to clean growth. LNG producing half the carbon emissions of coal. Coal that Canadian LNG will be displacing and replacing across Asian markets. We don't have to choose between a healthy economy and healthy air. We can build projects that are win-win. Projects that attract massive global investment and create jobs while also taking action on climate change and on protecting the environment. People like you show us that it's possible, because BC has always been a leader in supporting hardworking families while ensuring that our kids and grandkids get to breathe clean air and swim in safe water. Consider that BC has had a price on pollution longer than any other province. People here have seen the result firsthand. Pollution is down and jobs and growth are up. In fact, you have the fastest growing economy of any province or territory in the country. Unfortunately, there are still those who ignore the threat of climate change and are oblivious to the huge potential of a clean growth economy. Andrew Scheer still doesn't have a plan to support Canadians in the economy of today while protecting the environment for tomorrow. He'd rather leave us stuck in the past while this new, exciting economy passes us right by. Eh bien, nous refusons d'être complaisants. Nous sommes prêts et disposés à agir. Les changements climatiques sont une véritable menace, ça fait aucun doute. Mais en même temps, une économie axée sur la croissance propre offre d'immenses possibilités aux pays et aux entreprises qui choisissent d'en être les fers de lance. There are already more than 200 clean tech companies here in BC, but together we can do even better. With our Low Carbon Economy Fund, we're helping BC businesses become more innovative while reducing emissions. Our government is building on your victories, supporting you as you innovate and tackle climate change. And my friends, this is just the start. We're going to keep working with leaders like you to ensure that BC stays a leader both here at home and on the world stage. By continuing to collaborate, we can build an economy for the 21st century, prosperity for the middle class, new trade opportunities for Canadian businesses, and a healthy environment for everyone. That's the future we can create together. I'm up to the challenge, and I know you are too. My friends, thank you again for inviting me to be with you today. It's been a real honor, and I'm looking forward to our conversation with Ian and through him with all of you. Merci beaucoup, mes amis.
Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
So welcome to Vancouver.
Very well dressed.
Thank you. I like your choice in tie.
But you have better socks.
That's a compliment. I'll take it. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. So thank you for agreeing to do this. We have just a little under 20 minutes. And I want to remind everybody at this point that if you have not taken advantage of the Slido technology, now's the time to do so. Have a wee look at your phone, type in slido.com. You'll be prompted for the password. Canada 2018, I believe, is the password. and you can vote on other people's questions if you don't want to enter one of your own. So I'll start off with a few questions of my own, and then we'll see what's on the minds of the folks in the audience. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
So let me start by offering up really another really well-deserved victory lap on the LNG Canada announcement. That was such a big deal at so many levels, as the business community, especially after the last number of years and the challenges around TMX and the Trans Mountain situation, I actually think we needed a really good shot on the arm. We needed a reminder that there is confidence in this country on a global scale. We also needed to see, though, and this is where I want to take the question, we also needed to see the federal government cooperating with industry, which it did. We needed to see the provincial government cooperating with industry, which it did. First Nations, Indigenous communities cooperating amongst each other and with the communities, et cetera, et cetera. Now that you've had several weeks to kind of bask in that moment, what do you think we've learned as a country on this point? And what do you think the federal government can do next with respect to reinforcing or restoring the narrative that this is a great place in which to invest?
Well, first of all, thank you for the credit. But as you mentioned, this has been a long time that a lot of different governments, including my predecessor government and governments here in BC, have been working on quite extensively. Since we got elected 3 years ago, I'd had a number of meetings in places like Davos, in Shanghai, in other places when I was around the world with leadership of Shell and others to really demonstrate that we were interested and indeed behind this project. And one of the reasons we're very much behind this project is because for us, it's a demonstration that things can be done if they're done the right way. From the very beginning, the LNG Canada project partnered with Indigenous peoples, looked at the environmental consequences and made a case for what they were doing in a way that didn't just reassure their partners and the business associates, but actually connected with Canadians and answered people's fundamental questions. We can no longer do business or big projects in a vacuum, not aware that citizens increasingly have opinions and concerns and thoughts about the long-term viability and impact of projects on our communities, on their kids' futures. And that's why being able to hold up a project like that really did one of the things that I've been talking about for a long time, and quite frankly, a point of disagreement I had with the previous federal government, that the way to get big projects built isn't to, quash environmental voices or further marginalize Indigenous communities that might be opposed to it, but to bring them in, to listen to their concerns, to work with them as you move forward, to try and, if you can, reach consensus, if not, at least demonstrate that you are listening and responding to their specific concerns, that is the path that we need to walk if we're going to get big projects built. And that, as you say, does require real cooperation, collaboration, and trust between governments and businesses, but also with governments, businesses, and communities. And that rebuilding of the trust and demonstrating that we can do really, really big things like LNG Canada is the kind of signal that I think it's so important for Canada to send.
That is, I agree. So you touched on, I had a few questions here on trade. You touched on a lot of the material in your remarks, so I'll have to skirt around it just a little bit so you're not repeating yourself. But I do want to go back here for a second. It was music to our ears as the Board of Trade to hear you talk about trade diversification. So British Columbia, for 10 years from basically 2001 to 2011, deliberately diversified its trade away from the US. We're the only province in the country that does not do about 85% of its trade with America. We're about 50%-ish at the moment. So so this is, certainly we're on the same page when it comes to that story. Tell me just a little bit about your motivation around the mandate for Minister Carr on this, because you've given him very specific tasks here. What does that mean?
Yes, well, actually, there's two pieces of it that really are highlighting. Yes, Minister Carr is our Minister of International Trade Diversification, so that's specifically within his job title. But our Small Businesses Minister, Mary Ng, is also Minister for Small Business and Export Promotion, because that is getting businesses to understand the opportunities out there and helping them actually think about the global marketplace we're part of, and quite frankly, the desire there is out there for Canadian partnerships or Canadian products is something we have to do a better job with. I mean, there's a lot of governments patting themselves on the back whenever you sign a trade deal, but signing of the trade deal is actually the beginning of the work of actually benefiting from that trade deal. And what we're seeing is, yes, we've signed some very big trade deals, but we've also been working very, very hard on getting people to realize the opportunities and the potential that comes with having preferential access to 2/3 of the global economy. And that is something that right now we're looking at as next steps. We're looking at an ASEAN free trade. We're looking at Mercosur. We're looking at the Pacific Alliance. We are looking at continuing to expand this great run of being a country that is unabashedly promoting trade at a time of equally unabashed protectionism in many, many countries. And we can't fully take credit for it as a single government, because Canadians have always understood how important trade is. We've always had way more resources than our local markets have been able to develop and benefit from fully. We've always needed access to international markets. We're just making sure that while we do that, we remember to make a case for trade that is progressive. And that's a loaded word for some people. It's just simply pointing out that trade deals can be good for everyone if they're signed right. Because trade creates growth, we all know that. But that growth doesn't automatically get shared with everyone unless you think about that deliberately, and making sure you're protecting labor standards, making sure you're creating opportunities for small businesses and startup entrepreneurs, as well as well-established multinationals and the company's bottom line and the country's bottom line. These are the kinds of things that involve actually making an active case for why trade is important, why trade is beneficial. And fortunately for all of us, Canadians have been open to that, been very responsive to that, and that's part of why we have been able to close these 3 big deals over the past 3 years.
So related hot button for us also on the topic of trade is interprovincial trade and some of the challenges that exist there. And you now have stats being released that says the barriers between the provinces doing business amongst themselves, as crazy as it sounds, is the equivalent of about a 6.9, almost 7% tariff, almost like another PST in the case of British Columbia. So we've done great work internationally. Talk to me about the federal government's priorities with respect to interprovincial trade at a time where you've got the provinces now taking it upon themselves. We bet you got the New West Agreement with BC, Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. You had an MOU announced with Ontario and Saskatchewan just this week that they want to do something on this topic. This is a pretty big deal within the provinces. Where does this fit into the priorities of the federal government?
This is a massive priority for us, and it's something that I'm actually pulling together a First Ministers meeting in December on, so that we can actually really do something meaningful about interprovincial trade barriers. It makes no sense that a trucking company needs to have 3 different first aid kits to go from Halifax to Winnipeg. There are obvious things we need to streamline. But one of the things that really pulled it out was when we signed a CETA with Europe. People suddenly discovered that European countries had better procurement access to certain provinces than the neighboring provinces did. And people said, well, that makes no sense. So there was a quick fix on that we did with an earlier agreement. But now it's time to really pull people together. And it's funny because you talk to the provinces and they all say, oh yes, no, we totally believe in free trade. It's not us who's the problem. It's them who are doing this, and we just have to respond. So there's a lot of finger pointing, including at the federal government. So we basically said, look, tell us what your problems with the federal government. We'll be first mover. We can't pretend that you want to get rid of trade barriers and we're not going to do all sorts of things. Let's point out where we can all work together, because there's a huge appetite for it. There's an expectation that we do it. And if we are going to truly be a significant player, as we can be in the global supply chains, in the global economy, it's obvious that we need to do a better job of working together internally.
Yeah, your first aid kit example is a good one. The other one is that if a transport truck, in the same spirit, if a transport truck leaves Victoria and drives to St. John's, Newfoundland, it's actually offside with the law 20 different times. Like, we can't decide on the definition of a truck. So the regulatory element is just important. So Godspeed on that. That's a big one for us. Let me.
Well, and every single premier says, yes, we absolutely want to do it. So and we're just removing the excuses that other people aren't doing it. We're going to get them all together. And I'm very confident that I and and Dominic LeBlanc, who is our Intergovernmental Affairs Minister focused on international trade, on internal trade. We'll get it done.
You can count on us to cheer you on that one, because that's a huge one. I'm going to ask you one more thing, and then we're going to go to the questions. I want you to paint a broad picture, if you could. So the backdrop of this commentary of mine is one of anxiety. So I've been in this gig about 7 years, and I've never felt a level of anxiety as we're currently feeling in the business community at the moment. So the LNG Canada, like I said, it was a much needed shot in the arm. The backdrop for that is a lot of the business community is feeling they're getting it from all angles right now. And to be very fair, it's spread across various levels of government. So this is not an attacking kind of question, but there's issues around regulations, there's tax rates, there's the Donald Trump tax changes, which has really taken us from being at a competitive advantage with a corporate tax rate to now being at a disadvantage. And you're seeing foreign direct investment start to do things that we don't like. So paint as a picture, if you could, on the vision that you see for the economy as you and Minister Morneau look out 5 and 7 years. What do you see out there to give us the confidence that this thing is going to really turn around for us?
I have spent a lot of time over the past months talking with leaders in the business community, from some of our top CEOs individually to tables of conversations around competitiveness. And yes, the U.S. tax changes have brought them to a place where they are closer to being competitive with where Canadian tax rates have always been. And that question of competitiveness is one that keeps coming back. I mean, we know that we have to remain competitive with the United States and with our major trading partners, and that's absolutely something we'll look at. We're having a number of economic announcements coming up in the coming months. We have a fall economic statement at the end of November. We'll have a budget next year, and obviously those will be great themes on how we make sure that people know it's good and easier to do business in Canada than in many other places around the world. There are specific measures we're looking at that I think people will be pleased with, but there also needs to be a recognition of the tremendous advantages that Canada has. We have a country that is, for one, at a time where we're seeing labor shortages and close to full employment in so many countries around the world, including the United States, we're a country that is open to immigration and understands that drawing in skilled labor from around the world is an incredible plus to our jobs, to our economies, to our businesses, and continuing to do that. I mean, that was one of the things that I heard from an early meeting with business leaders, particularly in the tech sector, who said, you know what, if you could make immigration a little bit easier, particularly for highly skilled superstars that we want to bring in and build sort of an R&D facility around, that would be great. And this was at the beginning of our term, while Obama was still president, and we said, okay, well, let's make immigration that much easier. And what we moved forward with was the global skills strategy. And if you don't know about it, you should. You can bring in top talent in specific sectors in 2 weeks to Canada. Get them a work visa, get them going. And that kind of ability to bring in great people from around the world to lead the new offices that people want to set up is not just giving us a boost in people wanting to invest here, but it's creating more great jobs for top Canadian graduates of our great schools and creating ecosystems in which a lot of exciting things are happening. So we are a country that has realized that the workplace is changing, the nature of work is changing, the disruptions going on are massive, from AI to robotics to different and more complicated supply chains around the world that will be disruptive to the status quo on business. But as a country, you have two choices. You can say either, well, I'm going to drag my heels and try and stretch out the status quo for as long as we can because it's been good to us. Or you say, well, let's dive into the future with optimism and courage and invest in the kinds of things that we know are going to matter in the future. And that's why I just came from a big announcement at Triumph where we're investing in particle physics research and new medical isotopes. We've invested in science and innovation and research to a degree that no government ever has. We're investing in skills and education and training and making it accessible, not just for students, but for people who are mid-career and realizing that they might want to change their career track to something that might carry them through till retirement in better stead. So there's all sorts of things we're doing to embrace the future that countries and companies around the world are looking at with great interest. So I'm seeing a tremendous amount of enthusiasm from certain sectors of the Canadian business community, worries about the disruptions we're surrounded with from other sectors of the business community. But if I have a message, it's trust in Canadians, trust in workers, trust in our ability to innovate and create the solutions that are going to be appealing not just to our nearest neighbors, but to the entire world. Canada has and Canadians have a capacity to generate the kinds of products, solutions, and innovations that the world needs. We just have to do a better job of stepping up and engaging with them. Trade, immigration, and innovation are three key ways in which we're going to be able to do that.
So you've answered the first question that's from the audience, which is how you're going to respond around retain skilled labor. I think you've answered that, so I'll exercise moderator's prerogative. I want to go to the second one around infrastructure. So we are sitting literally about 40 feet, if you could jump through that window. We're sitting about 40 feet from a piece of water which sees $500 million a day float in and out of the port, 250,000 jobs involved in the gateway here, $28 billion in GDP for the province of British Columbia. And the infrastructure investments here are so important. We like to say, and my staff would give me a hard time if I didn't use this phrase with you on stage, this is the St. Lawrence Seaway of the 21st century. There is no question what this region represents to our country for the next 100 years. Yep. So when we take all that into account, and the question has to do with priority infrastructure investments, talk to us, if you would, about the importance of the Pacific Gateway in the priorities of the federal government and how we can meaningfully get back into where we need to be in the investments there.
Well, I mean, as a little reminder, back in 2015, we made a choice that was different from our two main opponents. We said, we're not going to focus on balancing the budget at all costs. We are going to focus on investing in what our communities and our country needs to grow and thrive. We made a conscious decision to put forward the largest plan for investment in infrastructure that Canada has ever seen, whether it's been public transit, whether it's been trade corridors, whether it's been green infrastructure, whether it's been research and scientific infrastructure, whether it's our national housing plan. These are things that we have made a decision to invest in. And we have done that. And we are going to continue to do that because we see the opportunity to trade more and better with the world. This morning, literally, I was in Churchill, Manitoba, announcing the reopening of the rail line that's going to take us to our only deepwater Arctic port, because that's going to be, unfortunately, with climate change, but fortunately for the people in Churchill, a more and more important way of getting our resources to markets differently. There are all sorts of things we need to continue to do, but at the same time, we know how important it is to do it safe. So when we talk about investing in infrastructure like ports and bridges and highways and rail terminals and airports, which we are continuing to, and there's lots more plans in the hopper for that, we're also doing the other thing that really matters to me as a son and grandson of BC, but also to all of you, which is making sure we're managing the risks and protecting our oceans. We move forward with a $1.5 billion oceans protection plan that is putting us at the very top tier of the countries around the world in protecting our coasts, protecting our waters, in terms of creating protected areas, marine protected areas, and land protected areas. We're doing well, but we needed to make sure we were getting the tools for it. And I'm pleased to have your own local North Van boy, Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, who was just yesterday making an announcement about the tangible measures we're putting forward to protect the southern resident killer whale pod by both boosting Chinook stocks, by creating more protected zones, and by bringing in mandatory measures on tanker and traffic noise and speed. So these are things that go together. You can't talk about investing in trade infrastructure without making sure you're also doing the responsible things to reassure people that that trade infrastructure is going to lead to good things and not bad things.
So let me pull on that thread. So because the Oceans Protection Plan, which is very, very comprehensive, was a very, very big part of the Trans Mountain TMX strategy. And there's a question there, a nice open-ended question. What's next for TMX? What can you tell us about where that's at?
Well, listen, I will admit that the Federal Court of Appeal decision was really frustrating. We, as you know, when we got elected in 2015, we said we were going to strengthen the oversight and the process, not start from zero, but strengthen the process for the existing pipeline projects, Energy East, Trans Mountain Pipeline, and Northern Gateway. Northern Gateway, we canceled because the Great Bear Rainforest is no place for a crude oil pipeline. But on TMX, we knew that we had to strengthen the environmental oversight, and we needed to do a better job of working with communities, working with Indigenous communities specifically. And we did. But the Federal Court of Appeal came back and said, you did, but you didn't quite do it enough. In my defense, I feel we were starting from a standing start because the government previous to us didn't put enough of a priority on working with Indigenous peoples and respecting environmental science and the concerns. But nonetheless, we should have done a better job, and that's what the Federal Court of Appeal said. But what they also did was gave us a blueprint and said, if you do this with Indigenous peoples properly, and if you fold in these elements of environmental science and oversight, well, then you will have the right decision to move forward on. So what the court is actually doing is laying out with more clarity the path to get big projects approved. And surprise, surprise, like LNG Canada, it means being thoughtful in your partnership with Indigenous peoples, and it means getting the environmental science right. So what I feel actually, and this is also something that is reflected in our C69, which is a bill we're putting forward to give more clarity, more information, better partnerships up front on big projects in terms of oversight and assessment, so that when a company decides to invest and to move forward with a project, they will have a much better idea up front of how long it's going to take, what the risks are that it might be not approved or approved, because it'll be much clearer around the expectations. And it's a process that once you go through it successfully, will keep you protected from lawsuits later saying you didn't do things right in respecting, the requirements to consult or the necessity to protect our environment. So this is about creating that greater degree of clarity for businesses, but also about restoring people's trust in governments and businesses' ability to get things done right for the long term. People are cynical about businesses and institutions' ability to actually think about the long term. That's a reality of our time. That's one of the things that has led to a certain amount of populism and mistrust of institutions and process. If we can restore trust in the processes we put forward and in the economic community's ability to actually do things the right way, then everything becomes easier. I mean, one of the things I point out is the Keystone XL pipeline is not bogged down in Canada. We approved of that pipeline. It's actually bogged down in the United States, where supposedly things are much easier, where there's less regulation. Well, it's bogged down because of Indigenous and environmental concerns in the United States. So, there is no country in the world that is not facing these challenges as citizens wake up and realize you have to make sure you're doing things right. Just we are positioned, particularly you here in BC, are well positioned to demonstrate that you get that and that we can bring Canadians along with us in building a future that both protects the environment and creates those good, sustainable, better jobs for future generations.
So there's a grab bag of 3 questions there. And I'm setting you up here because we're going to give you the last moment, the last word. That is our tradition. You can think about that for half a second. So you got a question there to talk about the current electoral structure referendum taking place in BC. That's door number one. Door number two, you can talk about healthcare and the strains on it and talking about healthcare providers. Door number three is the Surrey LRT versus SkyTrain conversation. So all these are winners. You've got a potpourri of choice, and I'll leave it to you, and then you can close out the remarks, and we'll ask John to come up and say thanks in just a minute. So this is your last word. Pick one of them and go for it.
Well, the first two are very much local issues that the federal government isn't going to weigh in on too much, although we were happy to sign historic healthcare agreements that included for the first time home care and mental health supports that are a huge priority for everyone. But on the LRT SkyTrain issues, I'm going to be meeting with the new mayor of Surrey, Mayor McCallum, a little later today. We have a very simple approach as a federal government on infrastructure. Ottawa shouldn't be deciding for you what it is that the Lower Mainland needs. We need to be there as a partner for your priorities. And over the past years, we have worked with the Mayor's Council across the Lower Mainland. We have worked with individual mayors. We've worked with the provincial government to identify the projects that matter to British Columbians, the projects that matter to you. And we've said, we will be full partners on these projects. If the Mayor's Council and various local voices decide they want to do things differently, and there's and they have a plan coming forward, we will be partners on that plan. I mean, there is $2.7 billion that we've set for infrastructure investments in British Columbia, and we trust the people of British Columbia to figure out what the best way to do that is, not up to politicians in Ottawa to draw lines on a map. It's up to the local people who know what the best things are, and we will be there to be a partner because BC deserves a strong and active and present partner in Ottawa. Like every province does, but sometimes we in BC feel a little further away from Ottawa, and that's why it's always such a pleasure to be here, to talk with you, to listen to your concerns, and mostly to continue to commit to be someone who is very passionate about this part of the country, not just because of family bias and my deep roots here, but because BC really matters to the future of the country. As we see centers of power gravitate towards Asia, BC is going to be that hub that keeps Canada connected with the growing economies around the world and continues to project the Canadian solutions and approach in the important places. So it's a great pleasure to be here today. It's a great pleasure to have chatted with you, Ian, but I look forward to the continued conversations that we're going to have as all of you continue to lead, to innovate, to break new ground, and to create real prosperity and success for all of us. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Canada, thank you for doing this. Thank you very much. I only have about 45 more questions to go, but unfortunately it is all the time. But thank you again for doing this. You're in an occupation which is second to none in this country in terms of how many different ways you're pulled in a given day, never mind a week or a month. And it is always an extra challenge to step up and take questions from an audience of any kind. So thank you for engaging us in such an intimate fashion. We don't take it for granted. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to invite John Orr, the Senior Vice President and Chief Transportation Officer for CN, to give the official thank you to our Prime Minister. Please welcome John to the stage.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, and thank you for the distinguished guests who've attended this great program. My name is John Orr, and as you said, I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Transportation Officer for CN. And I'm honored to be here today representing our CEO, JJ Rouet, and my 26,000 colleagues from across North America. Our economy is shaped by a multitude of factors, one of them being supply chain. And I would like to commend the Government of Canada for investing in infrastructure through the National Trade Corridor Fund and supporting crucial transportation corridors that serve Canadian businesses and the economy. The Port of Vancouver connects all of Canada and the world, and we are stronger through this collaboration. And Prime Minister, you can continue to count on CN to support the country by moving crucial goods that benefit all of Canada. On behalf of CN and all of us here today, I want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for taking the time to be here and sharing your thoughts on how Canada can continue to thrive as a trading nation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank again all the sponsors of today's event. Our presenting sponsors, Fasken and CN, our supporting sponsors, the Chartered Professional Accountants of British Columbia, Air Canada, Coast Capital Savings, Global Container Terminals Canada, and KPMG. Our community sponsors, Port of Vancouver, PwC, and MNP. Preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver. And today's event is presented in partnership with World Trade Center Vancouver. Let's give all the sponsors another round of applause. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being our guests today. Now, as is the custom, could I please ask all of you to rise and remain in place for the departure of the Honourable Janet Austin, Lieutenant Governor of the Province of British Columbia. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.